The mansion always seemed grander when the sun set. Its sprawling terraces glowed under soft exterior lights, reflecting on the polished marble floors inside. I poured myself a glass of my favorite aged whiskey and settled into the leather armchair in the study, the same chair my father had used when he ran the family business. The house was quiet, too quiet, and that silence gnawed at me. I had inherited more than just wealth from my father. I had inherited responsibility, expectation, and, apparently, deception. My brother, Ethan, had arrived last night for the weekend gathering I insisted we hold every year, a celebration of the family's legacy, a chance to connect before my work took me overseas again. But from the moment he walked through the door, something felt off. That sly smile, the way he lingered near the rooms where I kept the financial statements and legal documents, subtle but deliberate. It began with small things. I noticed his eyes lingering on the safe behind the painting in the study, a casual glance that was far too interested to be innocent. He asked innocent questions about recent investments, the way a stranger might, not a brother. Then came the jokes, slightly pointed remarks about how someone always ends up in charge of the fortune, and some siblings are luckier than others. I laughed politely, hiding my unease, but the seed of suspicion had been planted. I spent the morning walking through the house, pretending to admire the renovations and artwork, while my mind replayed every interaction from yesterday. Every word Ethan had spoken, every casual laugh or shrug felt like part of a puzzle I didn't yet have all the pieces for. He had never been like this when we were younger. Our childhood had been rough, yes, but we were loyal to each other, or at least I thought we were. By noon, the family had gathered in the dining hall for lunch. The table was set immaculately. Crystal glasses, polished silverware, a centerpiece that glowed under the chandelier lights. My mother smiled at both of us, trying to diffuse the tension I hadn't mentioned aloud. I sat at the head of the table, my eyes never leaving Ethan. He carried on a charming conversation with our cousins, but I noticed subtle gestures, hand movements toward a sideboard where I kept the keys to the study, the briefcase he casually brushed against when reaching for wine. It wasn't enough to accuse him outright, not yet. I needed proof. And the more I watched him, the more I realized this wasn't just about money. This was about power, control, recognition. The same traits that had driven our father to success now twisted into something dangerous. I excused myself from the table under the pretense of checking on preparations for the evening reception. As I walked down the hall, I traced my fingers along the wooden banister, the chill of the marble beneath my shoes grounding me. Alone in the study, I opened the safe just enough to glance at the documents inside. Trust funds, stock holdings, contracts that represented decades of work. I made a note of the key positions Ethan had expressed curiosity about. He didn't know I had set up a discreet monitoring system weeks ago, small cameras and motion detectors positioned to alert me to any unusual activity. The thought of catching him in the act sent a shiver down my spine, a mixture of fear and anticipation. Then I saw it. A small, seemingly insignificant envelope on my desk, one I had not placed there. My name was written in Ethan's handwriting. My heart thudded. I didn't open it immediately. Instead, I waited, pretending to review financial statements while watching the doorway. Moments later, he lingered in the hall, pretending to check the thermostat. I swallowed my shock and stayed calm. This weekend would not be like any other. The stakes were higher now, and I knew that careful observation, patience, and strategy were my only tools. Whatever Ethan planned, I would be ready.
By the time the family returned from the gardens, I had made a decision. I would not confront him openly. Not yet. I would gather proof, expose his intentions, and ensure that the family legacy stayed intact, without risking my life or my reputation. The first move, I realized, would be subtle. Every smile, every handshake, every conversation would now serve as part of a larger plan. Ethan had underestimated me, assuming family ties would blind me to his intentions. But I had learned early that loyalty and greed often collided in the quietest ways, and I was ready to watch, wait, and strike when the moment was right. As sunlight faded outside, casting shadows across the grand hall, I took another sip of whiskey. The envelope remained unopened on the desk, a silent reminder of what was at stake. The weekend had just begun, but already I understood one truth with chilling clarity. Family could be the cruelest battlefield of all.
The evening air carried the faint scent of jasmine from the gardens as the family gathered for drinks before dinner. The soft clink of glasses and laughter filled the terrace, a picture-perfect family moment. But I noticed every detail. Every smile, every tilt of the head, every seemingly innocent glance. Ethan was in his element. He mingled with the cousins and family friends, charming them effortlessly. His jokes drew genuine laughter, but the eyes never left me. There was something calculating behind that casual grin, a predator masquerading as a beloved brother. He had always been ambitious, yes, but this felt different, cold, purposeful. I excused myself to inspect the wine selection, pretending to admire the cellar's new additions. I had curated these bottles personally, each one representing a milestone in the family business. A 1995 Bordeaux from the year we expanded internationally. A rare 1998 champagne reserved for the family's landmark events. I positioned them strategically. A casual observer might say for aesthetics, but I had another reason. From the terrace doorway, I could see Ethan leaning casually against a pillar, his fingers brushing against the railing as if by accident, his eyes flicking to the study. He hadn't realized I had installed small, unobtrusive cameras in the hallway. I watched him subtly reach toward the safe, his movements quick, rehearsed, almost like a dance. Dinner began. The table glittered under candlelight, silverware reflecting the flames. My mother's gentle voice attempted to steer the conversation toward childhood memories and family traditions. Cousins shared updates about work and travels. Everyone was laughing, yet the tension between Ethan and me was invisible to the others. Only I could see the undercurrents, the subtle battle lines forming. As the main course was served, Ethan leaned closer to me, his tone casual. "You know, it's impressive how you've handled everything since Dad passed, but wouldn't it be more efficient if we discussed some of the family investments together?" He smiled, and I smiled back, but inside, my mind raced. He wasn't asking, he was probing, testing boundaries, looking for weaknesses. I decided it was time to test him. "Of course," I replied lightly. "Let's step into the library for a moment. I have some documents that might interest you." His eyes gleamed, a mixture of surprise and anticipation. I led him down the corridor, past the portraits of ancestors who had built the family fortune with hard work and cunning. Once inside, I closed the door softly behind us and gestured toward the safe. "Here's what I wanted to show you," I said, my voice calm, almost inviting. He approached eagerly, hand hovering over the lock. "I thought you'd be interested in seeing the updated portfolios and trust documents." I watched him carefully. As he leaned closer, I subtly triggered the motion sensor I had installed earlier. The camera captured every micro-expression, hesitation, greed, excitement, everything. He didn't notice me adjusting the shelf slightly, a simple shift that left the envelope he had placed earlier just slightly protruding from the stack of files. "You always did know how to organize everything so neatly," Ethan said, reaching for the envelope. My heart pounded, but my face remained neutral. "It's all about precision," I replied. His fingers brushed against the paper, and I could see him fighting an internal struggle. He knew he wasn't supposed to touch it, yet temptation had already taken hold. Suddenly, the sound of laughter from the terrace broke the tension. Ethan flinched, as if reminded that we weren't alone. I smiled, the warmth masking the storm of suspicion and strategy brewing inside me. "Let's join the others," I said. He followed, his movements slightly off, like a cat realizing its path had been watched. Back at the table, he acted normal, smiling, joking, engaging, but I knew better. The envelope, the subtle probing, the casual glances, it all confirmed what I had suspected. This weekend would reveal more than memories. It would expose character. Greed and ambition, or loyalty and love, would soon be tested. As the dessert plates were cleared and coffee poured, I caught him staring at the study doorway again. My pulse quickened, not with fear, but with the thrill of knowing I had the upper hand. He thought he was in control, but the game had already shifted. I had eyes everywhere, and I was ready to let events unfold, capturing every move, every word, every gesture that betrayed his intentions. Tonight, the house was full of laughter, warmth, and elegance. But beneath the surface, the real story was beginning. The story of a brother whose ambition could threaten everything, and a sister-in-law watching carefully, hidden in the plain sight, or perhaps a silent observer in the wings. And I knew without a doubt that by morning, nothing would be the same.
The first rays of morning sunlight spilled across the polished floors of the estate, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch like fingers, hinting at secrets waiting to be revealed. I woke early, before anyone else, with a sense of purpose and caution. Yesterday's interactions with Ethan had left me unsettled, but not unprepared. I had always trusted my instincts, and right now they were screaming that this weekend would decide more than family dynamics. It would decide the future of our wealth. Breakfast was a quiet affair. Mother hummed softly in the kitchen while arranging fruit and pastries with her usual elegance. Cousins trickled down the grand staircase, still groggy but cheerful, unaware of the tension underlying the family gathering. I poured myself a coffee and checked the study one last time. The safe, the documents, and the envelope Ethan had been eyeing yesterday were all exactly where I had left them, but I couldn't leave anything to chance. I called in my assistant, Claire, a discreet professional who had been with the family for years. "Keep an eye on everything. Watch the hallways and entrances. Make sure no one sneaks off with anything unusual," I instructed, my tone calm but firm. Claire nodded, her eyes reflecting the seriousness of the task. She was as reliable as she was discreet, which made her an invaluable ally in a house where appearances were often deceiving. By mid-morning, Ethan appeared in the library. Casual, as always, pretending to skim through the newspapers. His eyes, however, betrayed curiosity and calculation. "I was thinking about some of the old investments Dad left behind," he said, leaning lazily against the bookshelf. "Some of them could be quite profitable if handled correctly." He smiled, but I could sense the manipulation behind it. He was trying to lure me into a discussion where his intentions could gain leverage. I followed his lead, keeping my demeanor relaxed. "Yes," I replied softly. "Some of the old portfolios have potential, but they need careful management. Careless handling could be disastrous." My voice was even, controlled, but each word was deliberate, a subtle warning he would feel if he pushed too far. He reached for a nearby shelf, pretending to adjust a book. That was my moment. I had discreetly marked one ledger, a hidden journal containing transaction records that Ethan had overlooked. A ledger that, if revealed correctly, would show attempts at manipulation and subtle exploitation over the years. I moved the ledger slightly forward, ensuring it was within reach, as if by accident. "You were always meticulous," he said, noticing the shift, his hands hovering just above the book. He didn't realize the trap I had set. I had placed a small tamper-evident ink sticker on the pages. Any attempt to remove or open the ledger without my knowledge would leave an unmistakable mark. "I tried to be thorough," I replied, with a calm smile. "Some things need more attention than others, wouldn't you agree?" He nodded, too absorbed in the potential gains to realize he was being observed. Every movement, every hesitation, every glance had been noted and captured by the hidden cameras I had installed. We lingered in the library for another hour, our conversation weaving between innocent family topics and financial discussions, though every word from Ethan was carefully examined. His eagerness, his sly smiles, his half-truths, they were all part of the story I was now documenting. By mid-noon, the rest of the family joined us, unaware of the tension building in the room. I guided Ethan subtly back to the terrace, ensuring that the ledger remained in plain sight. His ambition, unchecked, could lead him to reveal his true intentions, and once he did, I would have everything I needed to protect the family legacy while exposing the betrayal to everyone who mattered. As lunch progressed, I caught a fleeting glance from Claire, a subtle nod. She understood what was at stake. No one would notice the quiet battle unfolding behind the smiles and polite conversation, yet the truth would soon emerge. Every family gathering, every toast, every laugh, this weekend was now a stage for revelation, for judgment, for justice. Ethan's ambition would either be contained or exposed, and I, patient and vigilant, would ensure that only those deserving of trust remain in my inner circle. By sunset, the first cracks in his facade would appear, and the family would finally see the lengths one person would go to protect their fortune and their life from betrayal.
The afternoon sun cast a warm glow across the estate gardens, but beneath the beauty of blooming roses and perfectly trimmed hedges, tension simmered. I had learned long ago that appearances could deceive. Every smile, every casual remark, every gesture might be hiding a plan, and today I was ready for whatever the family, or Ethan, might try next. After lunch, while the others lounged in the drawing room or wandered the grounds, I requested a private work with Claire. "We need to check the guest list, every detail," I said softly, careful not to raise suspicion. "Someone may be planning more than just conversation." Claire nodded, her eyes sharp and vigilant. Together we retraced the steps of the morning, observing entrances, hidden alcoves, and the library where the ledger had rested. Meanwhile, Ethan slipped away, under the pretense of exploring the wine cellar. I had expected him to make such a move. Ambition often pushes people toward temptation, especially when greed intertwines with ignorance. As he descended the staircase, I followed quietly, remaining unseen. The wine cellar, dimly lit and lined with oak barrels, seemed innocuous, but I knew better. Ethan had reached for the ledger. My careful planning had placed a secondary trap. The ledger's compartment was rigged with a subtle tamper alarm. The moment he lifted it, a soft, barely audible click echoed through the cellar. I pressed a button on my phone. Claire was ready on the hidden feed. She quietly alerted me through a discreet earpiece, confirming that the alarm had triggered. Ethan froze, eyes widening, realization dawning. I stepped into the cellar, deliberately calm. "Finding what you were looking for?"
I asked, keeping my tone neutral, almost conversational. Ethan's face betrayed panic, though he tried to mask it with a forced smile. I, I was just checking the wine inventory, he stammered. But the ledger lay in plain view, pages slightly fanned, the ink sticker evidence now unmistakable. Interesting choice of curiosity, I said, letting my gaze sweep over the ledger. It seems some family records are more tempting than vintage Bordeaux. His facade faltered. He tried to reach for the ledger, but I blocked him with a casual movement. The truth would reveal itself without force. You've been watching, waiting for an opportunity to exploit the family's wealth, I continued, my voice steady. It's time to stop pretending. Ethan's shoulders slumped, the confidence draining. You don't understand, he whispered. It's just business. But this was no longer about business. It was about betrayal. I turned and left the cellar, signaling Claire to close the door behind me. Ethan was trapped by his own miscalculations, unaware that every action had been monitored and recorded. When the family reconvened on the terrace for evening cocktails, I had the advantage, not through confrontation, but through evidence and patience. The guests gathered, chatting lightly, oblivious to the undercurrent of tension. I casually mentioned to a few of the older family members that some financial records had come up in discussion, never specifying Ethan. Their curiosity was piqued, subtle questions floated, and the stage was set for the revelation. That night, under candlelight and amidst laughter and music, I would orchestrate the unveiling. The ledger, the surveillance, the proof of hidden intentions all would converge. Trust, loyalty, and honesty would be rewarded. Deception, greed, and ambition without conscience would be exposed. Ethan, still unaware of the web of observation surrounding him, mingled with the other guests. Smiles, jokes, and casual glances masked his anxiety. He didn't realize that the family's eyes, both seen and unseen, had already judged his character. By the time dessert arrived, the truth would no longer be optional.
Dinner was served in the grand dining hall, the chandelier casting golden light across polished mahogany tables. Guests murmured approval at the arrangement. Fine china, crystal glasses, and centerpieces of deep red roses intertwined with white lilies. Everything appeared perfectly normal, but I knew that appearances were the most dangerous deception of all. Ethan sat at the head of the table opposite me, his expression carefully neutral, though I could sense the tension beneath. Claire was poised beside me, a quiet sentinel, watching both him and the reactions of the family. The first course arrived, seared scallops with delicate herb butter, followed by a chilled Chardonnay. Everyone raised their glasses in polite toasts, and I joined them, my movements deliberate, calm, and controlled. Ethan met my gaze briefly, then looked away, unaware that the first layer of exposure had already begun. Between courses, I casually directed conversation toward past family achievements, highlighting my philanthropic work and the way I had managed our estate over decades. Subtle remarks about responsibility and honesty floated like breadcrumbs, designed to unsettle. Trust is everything, I said lightly, sipping my wine, and sometimes it's what people exploit when they think no one is watching. Ethan's fingers drummed nervously against the tablecloth. He caught on, but it was too late. Every move, every hesitation, every flicker of his eyes had been noted. Then Claire guided the discussion toward family history. "Remember the old ledgers in the library?" she asked, her tone casual. "Some of those records reveal interesting details about past family decisions." Ethan stiffened. The guests, oblivious to his internal panic, leaned in, curious about historical anecdotes. I told stories with warmth and humor, but each anecdote carried hidden meaning.
Evidence that Ethan had tried to manipulate the books, the accounts, and the inheritance to his advantage. As dessert arrived, a delicate chocolate mousse adorned with raspberries, I stood. "Before we conclude tonight, there's something important to address," I said, letting my voice resonate across the room. Conversations tapered off, all eyes turned toward me. Family is about trust, loyalty, honesty. And sometimes we discover that someone we thought was one of us has been plotting behind our backs. Gasps filled the air. Some guests exchanged uncertain glances, while others leaned forward, anticipating drama. Ethan's face paled. His carefully constructed mask began to crack. It's not what it looks like," he stammered, but no one believed him. Claire's steady presence reinforced the truth. His duplicity had been witnessed, documented, and understood. Guests looked from him to me, and finally the realization sunk in. Trust had been broken beyond repair. By the time coffee and petit fours were served, Ethan had retreated to the hallway, unable to maintain the charade any longer. The family's attention returned to more celebratory topics, though the weight of what had been revealed lingered in the air. I raised a glass to Claire and the rest of the family, acknowledging their loyalty and support. The night had not gone as Ethan had imagined. Instead, it had affirmed the values I had always held dear. Tonight, wealth had nothing to do with money. It was about character, courage, and justice. And as I surveyed the room filled with friends and family who truly mattered, I knew that the betrayal had only strengthened the bonds of those who had remained loyal.
The tension from dinner lingered like a shadow, even as the family retreated to the drawing room for after-dinner drinks. The chandelier's light flickered over polished floors, reflecting off crystal decanters and the surface of my grandfather's antique desk. I leaned casually against the desk, sipping a glass of brandy, while Claire moved through the room quietly, checking that guests remained comfortable and unaware of the brewing storm beneath the veneer of civility. Ethan had excused himself, claiming he needed air, but I knew better. He was plotting. Every calculated step, every nervous glance toward the ledger or the display of family documents revealed the desperation of a man cornered. And yet, he underestimated one thing. Patience was my greatest weapon. I allowed him to stew in the shadows, while the rest of the family laughed, oblivious to the undercurrent of tension. "I still can't believe he thought he could manipulate the inheritance," whispered my cousin Anna, who had been quietly observing from the corner. "He's always been ambitious, but this is beyond audacity." I nodded, acknowledging her insight with a subtle smile. "Ambition," I said softly, "without loyalty is dangerous, but it always exposes itself if you watch carefully enough." Claire returned from attending to the guests, whispering details about Ethan's attempts to intercept sensitive correspondence in the study. I smiled faintly, knowing his arrogance would be his downfall. "Everything he's tried tonight has only strengthened our position," I murmured. "He's left a trail of evidence that will ensure no one forgets his intentions." By 10:30 p.m., the remaining family members gathered in the library. The fire crackled, casting warm shadows over leather-bound books and golden frames lining the walls. I motioned for them to sit, taking the head of the table as if orchestrating the next act of revelation. Ethan's absence only added weight to the room. Everyone sensed the culmination of a battle, even if they didn't yet know all the pieces. "I want to share something important," I began, carefully choosing my words. "Tonight, we witnessed the consequences of ambition divorced from integrity. Wealth and success can reveal character, or the lack thereof, and sometimes it forces difficult decisions about who remains in your life and who must be removed for their own good." Murmurs rippled across the room, and I saw nods of agreement. The gravity of the statement hung in the air like the scent of smoke from the fire. I explained the contents of the ledger, each entry highlighting unethical attempts to alter inheritance distribution, misappropriations, and manipulations Ethan had tried to carry out. Claire assisted by displaying scanned excerpts on the desk's smart panel. Guests leaned forward, shock mingling with disbelief as the full scale of Ethan's duplicity became clear. Even longtime family members, who had often tolerated minor transgressions for the sake of harmony, were visibly disturbed. Ethan finally returned, shoulders slumped and face pale, clearly having realized that he could no longer hide his schemes. What are you doing?" he asked, voice trembling as he approached the library doorway. "Something overdue," I replied calmly. "You've had the opportunity to explain yourself, yet you chose deception over honesty. Tonight, everyone here has seen the truth." I gestured toward the projected ledger entries. Ethan's gaze flickered, desperate and defeated, as he scanned the evidence laid bare. The room was silent, the crackling fire the only sound punctuating the moment. "I want to share something important. This is why wealth isn't just money. It's about responsibility, integrity, and ensuring that those who are entrusted with it honor the trust given. Those who cannot leave on their own, and often at their own expense." Claire quietly distributed copies of the relevant documents to senior family members, reinforcing the point. Ethan's face was ashen, knowing that his reputation had been permanently tarnished. The lesson was clear. Betrayal had no place among those who valued honor and loyalty. As the night drew to a close, family members offered words of support and relief. They recognized that justice had been served not through confrontation or anger, but through careful observation, patience, and strategy. Ethan, meanwhile, slunk away into the shadows, stripped of the power he had tried to wield. In that quiet moment, I realized that the true inheritance of wealth wasn't in the ledger or bank accounts. It was in the people you could trust, the alliances built over time, and the careful orchestration of events that revealed truth without unnecessary violence. The room exhaled as the tension dissipated, leaving a deep sense of triumph and resolution. Tonight, justice had been served, not by punishment, but by exposure. And in that exposure, the bonds of family loyalty were strengthened, while the dangerous ambition of one individual was permanently curtailed. The morning after the shocking revelation, the house was eerily quiet. Sunlight poured through the curtains, highlighting the stillness in every room. The echo of last night's confrontation lingered like a shadow over the polished floors. I moved through the living room slowly, my mind replaying every subtle movement, every glance, every word that had hinted at betrayal long before it had been confirmed. I found myself in the study, tracing my fingers over the leather-bound ledger where I had meticulously recorded every business transaction. Every number, every contract, every signature suddenly felt like proof of something far more personal, the trust that had been broken by someone I thought was family. Ethan's absence was deafening, his retreat into silence a thin veil for the storm of resentment that I knew still churned beneath the surface. Anna appeared at the doorway, her expression cautious yet determined. "Are you all right?" she asked, stepping into the room with measured care. There was concern in her voice, but also an awareness that the battle from last night was not entirely over. I nodded, though my mind was restless. "I am, but it's clear that appearances can be deceiving. People I trusted were plotting behind smiles." Her eyes softened. "It's hard to reconcile the family we thought we had with the truths we discover." I glanced at the ledger again, my thoughts sharp. Money, success, and influence had always been part of my life, but they were never meant to serve as tools of manipulation against me. Yet here they were, twisted by someone who believed greed could silence loyalty. Last night's confrontation had not only exposed betrayal, it had revealed character, both the vile and the virtuous. The tension in the house seemed to thicken as I recalled the subtle signs I had missed. The hurried phone calls, the whispered conversations, the carefully staged gestures, all now made sense. I had survived not because of luck, but because of observation, instinct, and patience. Each calculated move I had made in the face of deception ensured the protection of my legacy, my safety, and my integrity. Anna moved closer, resting a hand lightly on my shoulder. "You handled it with incredible composure. Many would have panicked." I gave a tight smile. Composure is all we have when betrayal walks in disguised as love or family. Now, it's about moving forward, wisely, cautiously, but without fear. The rest of the day passed in a blur of preparation and reflection. Arrangements had to be made to secure the estate, the documents, and even the fragile relationships that remained intact. Those who had proven loyalty were being quietly acknowledged, while the manipulators were already facing the consequences of their own choices. As dusk fell, I stood at the terrace, the wind carrying the faint scent of jasmine and freshly cut grass. The evening sky mirrored my resolve, bright with clarity, yet shadowed with lessons learned. Betrayal had walked into my life, attempting to destroy everything I had built, but it had also revealed an undeniable truth. Wealth and success might tempt greed, but discernment, patience, and intelligence would always protect the legacy that truly mattered. I took a deep breath, letting the tension ease from my shoulders. The silent betrayal had been revealed, the guilty exposed, and the innocent protected. And as the stars began to glimmer in the darkening sky, I knew one thing with certainty. The story was far from over, but the control was firmly back in my hands.
The next morning, the quiet of the house felt deceptive. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant hum of traffic outside, reminded me that danger could lurk where it was least expected. My mind, still alert from the previous night's revelations, gravitated toward the office. There, hidden behind years of meticulously organized files, was a ledger I had never shared with anyone, not because it was secretive, but because it contained the unfiltered truth of every financial move, every business decision, and every person who had truly supported or undermined my success. I unlocked the drawer with a sense of ritual. The ledger's leather cover felt cool under my fingers. As I opened it, the familiar scent of ink and paper filled the air. The pages were filled with numbers, signatures, and notes, but today they felt like more than documentation. They were proof. Proof of loyalty and betrayal, carefully cataloged over decades. I traced my finger down a line, stopping at a familiar name. The weight of memory hit me. I had almost trusted the wrong people, had almost allowed a wolf in sheep's clothing to manipulate not just my wealth, but my life. A knock at the door startled me. I looked up to see Ethan standing hesitantly in the doorway. His eyes were filled with uncertainty, but there was also a spark of curiosity, perhaps even hope. I heard what happened last night," he began cautiously. "Are you okay?" I gestured for him to enter. "I'm fine, but I need to show you something." Carefully, I handed him the ledger. This isn't just numbers. It's the truth of who's been trustworthy and who hasn't. Ethan's eyes widened as he flipped through the pages. Names he recognized, faces he had trusted, all laid bare in black and white. The ledger revealed patterns, connections, and moments of deception that would have gone unnoticed by anyone not paying attention. He looked up at me, his expression a mixture of disbelief and admiration. "You kept track of all this? All these years?" I nodded, not to catch anyone off guard, but to know the difference between someone who's loyal and someone who's willing to betray for greed or power. And last night,
confirmed everything I feared and everything I hoped I was wrong about. He leaned back, running his hand through his hair. So what now? How do we handle this? I closed the ledger slowly, the sound echoing like a judge's gavel in the silent room. Now we take action carefully, not out of anger, not for revenge, but for protection. We reinforce what's real, expose what's false, and make sure that no one can manipulate or harm us again. Outside, the wind carried faint sounds of everyday life, a car passing, a dog barking, but inside, the world felt sharply defined. Friends, allies, and family who had shown true loyalty were safe. The manipulators, those who had sought to destroy, were now exposed. Ethan's expression shifted from uncertainty to resolution. I see. We've got to be deliberate, careful, but you'll handle it, won't you? I smiled, a thin, controlled smile that carried both reassurance and warning. I always do. That's how success is preserved, not by being naive, but by being vigilant. And sometimes, the most powerful lessons come from seeing betrayal up close. The day wore on, each moment a careful assessment of what needed to be protected, what could be reclaimed, and what should be left behind. The ledger became our blueprint, not just for business, but for navigating the web of personal loyalties that had been tested and strained. As twilight approached, I stood by the window overlooking the city skyline, the fading light casting long shadows across the room. The world outside continued, unaware of the storm that had nearly swept through my life, unaware of the calculated steps I had taken to avert disaster. Betrayal had struck close, even within the walls of family and friendship. But vigilance, intellect, and patience had turned the tide. And while the ledger remained a silent guardian of truth, one thought echoed in my mind louder than any alarm. The next move was mine, and it would be decisive. Tonight would mark not just survival, but the beginning of reclaiming control, exposing lies, and ensuring that loyalty and integrity were the true measures of power.
Night had fallen, draping the city in a quiet tension. The previous weeks of careful observation, subtle maneuvering, and discreet investigation had all led to this moment. The truth was no longer hidden. It was meticulously documented, undeniable, and ready to confront those who had sought to manipulate and betray me. I gathered the key players in the conference room, a select group of family, loyal friends, and allies who had proven their integrity over the years. The air was thick with anticipation. Everyone sensed that something significant was about to unfold. I set the ledger in the center of the polished oak table, its letter cover reflecting the overhead lights, a silent testament to decades of loyalty and deception. "Tonight," I began, my voice calm yet commanding, "you will witness the difference between those who act out of greed and self-interest and those who act with honor." The room fell silent, eyes fixed on me. I opened the ledger to a marked page, names and transactions clearly highlighted. These are the actions, choices, and patterns that reveal the true character of the people around us. A murmur ran through the group as faces shifted uneasily. Some eyes darted to others, suspicion beginning to pierce the comfortable facades. I continued, "Betrayal can be subtle, but it leaves traces. I have documented it, and tonight we see the consequences." Wendy's absence was noted immediately. The daughter-in-law who had nearly destroyed the balance of family and trust had vanished after the last incident, her departure leaving a void and a warning. Dennis, seated at the end of the table, looked both conflicted and relieved. He had been caught between loyalty to me and love for his wife, yet now the clarity of truth allowed him to step back from blind allegiance to deception. I paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. Some believed wealth and success were reasons for manipulation, for exploitation, for taking what wasn't rightfully theirs. But loyalty, respect, and integrity are not commodities. They cannot be bought, borrowed, or coerced. I walked around the table slowly, making eye contact with everyone present. "These are the people listed here," I said, tapping the ledger, "who betrayed trust, who placed personal gain above human decency. And the people who are here tonight, those who stood by me, who offered genuine support, are those who will define the future of this family, this legacy, and our collective lives." Dennis finally spoke, his voice firm yet reflective. I understand now, Dad. I see who truly deserves our trust. I see how close we came to losing it all." The room was quiet, but tension had been replaced by an understanding. Betrayal had been exposed, and the survivors of loyalty had been validated. I closed the ledger slowly, the sound echoing like a judge's gavel. "This is not vengeance. It is clarity, it is justice, and it is a lesson for anyone who thinks deception can remain hidden." Outside, the city lights shimmered like 1,000 tiny witnesses. Inside, trust was restored, bonds had been tested and strengthened, and the toxic influence had been removed. The path ahead was clear. The relationships I chose to nurture were now defined by honesty, respect, and true loyalty. I turned to Dennis, placing a firm hand on his shoulder. "Tonight, we reset the rules. Family, friendship, and partnership are earned, not assumed. Let this be a reminder that integrity outlasts greed and wisdom outmaneuvers deceit." He nodded solemnly, understanding more in that moment than weeks of explanation could have conveyed. Outside, distant car horns and nighttime sounds reminded us that life goes on, but within these walls, a reckoning had taken place. We toasted quietly, a small gesture, but rich with significance, not for the wealth that at once tempted betrayal, but for the loyalty, courage, and moral fortitude that had survived the storm. The ledger was closed, the room breathed again, and the future, unburdened by deceit, stretched ahead. Wendy's absence was both a relief and a statement. Those who betray are left behind, while those who honor trust move forward, stronger, wiser, and unshakable. And in that moment, I realized something profound. Victory is sweetest, not in wealth, not in power, but in having the clarity to recognize who truly belongs in your life, and the courage to protect what matters most.